Hello and welcome back to another episode of Focus on K-12, EdTech, and the Education Experience. I'm your host, Doug Konopelko, Education Strategist for CDWG. Today, I talk with Dr. Lakisha Brinson of Metro Nashville Public Schools in Tennessee about blended learning and what the future of blended learning might look like in our school districts. Let's dive in.
My name is Lakisha Brinson. I am the Director of Instructional Technology and Library Services in Metro Nashville Public Schools, which is Nashville, Tennessee. Longtime educator. I've been in the education field for, this year will be my 16th year. Classroom teacher, librarian, district coach, and now I have the amazing opportunity to help lead the district in all things instructional tech. So myself and an amazing team get to think through platforms and integration of technology into teachers' classrooms.
Well, great, and congratulations on the education career and on the moves upward here. So, one thing that's definitely been brought into the spotlight this year is this idea of digital transformation, blended learning. So let's start by going backwards. Take me in your time machine 2 years ago. Sort of where was Metro Nashville with blended learning, or just how do you feel like we were as educators with blended learning?
Yeah, so great question. I do want to, because I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the work that has been done even 2 years before. Years ago, our district did go down the journey of blended learning. We used a particular strategy and platform at that time to really think through blended learning. In full transparency, we learned a lot of lessons about the difference between buy-in and mandates. So that initiative was really a mandate. So fast forward now 2 years in, now we know pandemic, right? A lot of things have happened. And one of the things that we as a district want to build on is the momentum where teachers and students have really gained a lot of skills such as perseverance, troubleshooting on their own, problem solving. So we believe that students and teachers are very much more able to tackle the technical components of technology and computers. So now we're looking at, okay, where do we go from here? Our district, 2 years ago, our district was not a one-to-one device district. So our mayor was gracious. And so we now are a one-to-one district, right? That was different from 2 years ago. So now what we're saying as a district is, okay, we've been gifted these devices and that's amazing, right? But it's time to move past the hardware and really think about how do we use this to transform teaching and learning. So that's where we are now. Really thinking through what blended learning means for our district, for our students, and ultimately our teachers.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned you can't really mandate it to happen and it just happens, right? I think we used to say when I was at the district, you can't legislate success,
Oh
right?
my
You've got
gosh.
to be able to put those things into practice. So taking those lessons learned, right, plus what we've learned very recently, right, over the last year, what are you looking at going forward, right? As we sort of fast forward, what do you think blended learning looks like in the future for Metro Nashville?
Yeah, so yeah, not legislating, right? So really building that culture. But it's a saying that says to go fast, you have to go slow. So we're being very intentional about some of the decisions, all of the decisions that we're making. For example, I'm glad to say that our superintendent is really the one who really said, okay, we have these devices now, what? So because that message is strong in her head, then we have the backing of the superintendent. So what we've done now is started working with our chief academic officer and what we call our executive director. So every 2 weeks, a committee of executive directors who oversee our principals, myself and the curricular admin are working together to really think through what blended learning means for us. So first we had to get on one page, right? So first we had to define blended learning. And for us in Metro Nashville Public Schools, that's making sure that our students have a time, place, and path but really the where, when, and how they learn, that they get to be create student ownership over their own learning. Another thing that we're being very intentional about is getting feedback often. So again, those 2 week periods, but really thinking through our time as educators ourselves. And we really want teachers to see this as a add-in, not as an add-in, but as an integration, right? This is not something extra, but this is how we're going to take strategies that you're already using. Like pre-pandemic, we may not have been as familiar with breakout rooms or how to do discussion boards or how to do flip grids. But now we're saying, oh, we don't want to lose all these skills that our students have learned. So now we're going to think about it in terms of pedagogy. How do I take these practices, these pedagogical shifts, and integrate technology in the midst of it? Not think about it in isolation, but we're doing this math lesson. This site is all about virtual manipulatives. What part of my lesson does this blend into the lesson? So I would say intentionality is where we are now, really being purposeful in the creation of the plan. So starting slow, we're right now, next June 7th, I'm going to release the plan to the principals, to the executive directors to roll out to schools. One of the things I'm most proud of is that we're saying, look, it would be a failure if we said that blended learning has to occur this next school year, right? We're not getting there this school year, next school year, or even the school year after, right? Even research says it takes 3 years for us to gain momentum and then to see gains, period. So we're doing what we're calling look for. So we're helping principals and teachers think through on a day-to-day, / week to week, what this could look like in the classroom to really transform and create that culture. So we realize it's not going to happen overnight, and we're advocating that everyone understands that we're going to meet you where you are.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Brinson, you mentioned intentionality, right? So, for folks who may not be as familiar, I know we use that term a lot,
Yeah.
especially in our work. But what would be an example of like intentional versus unintentional or unplanned use of a specific tool in the classroom, or whatever example you could come up with?
Yeah, so I'm going to use our district is a Office 365 district, Microsoft. So this school year, our teachers were able to record themselves in teams during instruction with their students, which was a game changer. We have never is a big word. The majority of our teachers and staff were not recording themselves and using those lessons for teaching and learning, right? So that's amazing. That is a very great step. But when we think about how to transform teaching and learning, we also have a tool called Microsoft Stream, right? And Stream doesn't just allow you to record yourselves, but it gives you opportunities to add questions. So imagine me teaching this lesson and being able to say, oh, we just talked about integers. What do you think an integer is? Give me an example, right? So going from just passively listening, so now I'm going up blooms, right? And students are really having to think through the actual content that I'm presenting. So it's not just me leading, but the students are actually engaging in the learning as well.
Excellent. You've mentioned before using the rigor and relevance framework. That's something that's used far and wide in education. I know that the push towards blended learning and intentionality, that really starts to work up more on the rigor side, right? But what we've seen as we go through, this past year and look at equity issues and things like that, we know that we have to also be really intentional about the relevance, right, of the work that we do. So what are some things that we can do as we shift towards blended to address relevance for our students?
Yeah, so good question. So I want to go back to a part of our why for blended learning, and it's all about the when, where, and how, right? So that brings the relevance to when are we orchestrating these lessons or carrying them out. Like 2 years ago, right? It was only happening in the classroom. But now, with our district being gifted devices, ideally our teachers can say, hey, for homework, home fun, you go home, look at this video. And when we get back in the classroom, then we're actually going to get into the meat of the discussion, right? Thinking through, when I think about relevance and thinking about student interest, right? What we're able to do now in terms of bringing in experts who don't have to physically be in the space, but I can bring in a astrophysicist, right? That our students can interact with, ask questions, really collaborate and build those relationships with, again, shows relevance. And really thinking about giving students, we hear a lot about choice, but actually walking it out, right? Where you're able to, you can create this project using Minecraft. You may choose to create to show what you know using Flipgrid, or someone else may choose to stand up and give a presentation. And that's all okay, but the relevance is that it's driven by student interest and student autonomy, which is amazing. Our district is very much a principal autonomy district, but like thinking through the lens of students want that too. Students want to know that feel like they have a sense of power over what they're learning, and ultimately with that, when you have that buy-in, your engagement just skyrockets.
Absolutely. And where engagement goes, the learning will follow, right?
Yes.
So you are obviously heavily ingrained in this work, being that it is your job day in and day out to be thinking about planning for, digital transformation and blended learning. So if I'm a leader who's newer to this, I want to learn and grow in this area, where are some of the experts, or what are some of the resources, books, blogs, whatever, that you've used to sort of help build up this knowledge along the way, outside of just your experience?
Yeah, so there is a book by Caitlin Tucker, Jason Green, and Tiffany Wyckoff called Blended Learning in Action. And I'm not finished with that book yet, but that book is really framing my thinking in terms of laying the groundwork, right? Actually establishing a framework, very systematic and very practical. So I definitely would encourage that one. And then it's a site, Blended Learning University, that really has lots of the research behind why blended learning works. So it's lots of white papers, and really because like we don't want to do something just to do it, back to intentionality, but there is research that says when we shift instruction through this approach, that engagement increases, which leads to achievement increases. So yeah, Blended Learning University, and then Blended Learning in Action.
Well, Lakisha, thank you so much for being on today and sharing some of your story with us.
Awesome. Thank you, Doug, for having me.
Thanks for joining us today on Focus on K-12 EdTech and the Education Experience. If you enjoyed today's show, please feel free to like, subscribe, and click the little bell so that you get notified whenever we post a new episode. Or reach out to me on Twitter @dconopelco. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time as we focus on K-12.